Okay, Econ 200, in the last video I talked about how firms are profit maximizers, or at least that's the way economists think about them when we model their behavior. And I mentioned that in order to understand profit maximizing, you have to understand the two components of profit, which are the revenues that your firm is earning and the costs that get subtracted from those revenues to calculate your total profit. So this video is going to be talking about costs and the various categories of cost. We're going to begin with a category of cost that we've already talked about in the very first week of class when we were discussing specialization and trade. We talked about opportunity cost. Maybe you remember that. It has been several weeks, so I'll forgive you if you're a little rusty on the concept. But opportunity cost, that's the benefit of the most valuable foregone alternative. Now, in that specialization and trade lecture, we said, we had a very simple world where there were two different things that you could produce, right? It was like fish and blankets for the example we used in the classroom. And so if you're not catching fish, then you would be, if you are catching fish, then the cost of that to you, the opportunity cost, is the blankets that you could have been weaving, and vice versa. If you choose instead to weave blankets, then your opportunity costs are the fish that you could have been catching instead. Okay. Now, what's important to note is in the real world, there are generally going to be more than one opportunity in front of you. And the opportunity cost is not all of the opportunities you're giving up. It's just the most valuable of those opportunities that you're giving up. So to give you a numerical example, imagine that your firm has, or maybe I'll keep the numbers small, so maybe it's not a firm. Maybe these are just small side hustles that you as an individual are engaged in or could be engaged in. And imagine that you've got three different opportunities in front of you. So opportunity one, or opportunity A, let's say that if you did that, you would earn profits of $1,000. And then you have opportunity B. That would earn you profits of, let's say, $500. And if you follow opportunity C, then you would earn profits of, let's say, $100. Now, if you're a profit maximizer, it's pretty obvious to you which of these opportunities is your best opportunity. It's opportunity A, right? This is the one that you want to pursue. You'd earn those profits of $1,000. Your opportunity cost is, of the two options that you didn't follow, whichever one would have given you the most profit, that is your opportunity cost. And the profit you would have earned would be the opportunity cost. So that's going to be this one right here. In this example, the opportunity cost is that $500. Okay? And then opportunity C over here, you didn't follow it, and it's not your second most valuable, or not your most valuable foregone alternative, and so you just wouldn't consider it when you're thinking about profit maximization. You would ignore opportunity C. Okay. Now this brings in a distinction that is important in economics: the distinction of different types of profit. So I told you here that you would earn a profit of $1,000 or a profit of $500 or a profit of $100, and that is using the language of what we would call accounting profit. Accounting profit is just the revenues that you earn minus your operating expenses. So it's the money that you make minus what you have to pay to anybody who works for you and any rent that you have to pay on your land or your buildings, and taxes that you have to pay the government and so on. That would be your accounting profit. This is what would show up on sort of the bottom line of your accounting statement, and it's how much money you'd be able to put into the bank after operating for a day or a year or however long we're discussing. And so these numbers are all given in terms of those accounting profits. Okay. However, economists use another term, which is economic profit. Economic profit is accounting profit minus opportunity cost. Okay? So in this case here, your accountant would tell you that you had earned profits of $1,000. And fair enough, you would be able to deposit $1,000 in the bank Okay. However, an economist would look at this and they would subtract out your $500 opportunity cost and say, yes, you were able to put $1,000 in the bank, but if you hadn't done this, you still would have been able to put $500 in the bank. So your economic profit of having gone after opportunity A is the $1,000 you earned in accounting profit minus the $500 opportunity cost that you could have earned if you hadn't been following opportunity A. So we would say that your economic profit here was $500, not $1,000. Now, that point is going to become important in the future because you're going to see in a perfectly competitive market, economists would say that in the long run, at least, profits are zero. Firms are making zero profit in perfectly competitive markets. When we say that, that could sound crazy because you could think, well, wait a second. If nobody's making any profit in this market, that means nobody's making any money in this market. And so they must all be going bankrupt, right? So why would I operate a business at which I'm not earning a profit? But when we say that there are zero profits, we're not talking accounting profits, okay? People are putting money in the bank. They are earning revenues in excess of their operating expenses. What we would say is that the economic profits in the long run become zero. If the economic profits become zero, what that means is the accounting profit that you're earning in the opportunity that you've pursued is exactly the same as whatever profit you could have gotten in your next best option, in your opportunity cost. So if option A were $500 instead of $1,000, and opportunity B is also $500, in that case, economic profit would be zero. And we would say you're making just as much money following opportunity A as you would have following opportunity B. Okay, now it turns out that that's going to be very important for making your economic decisions. Okay, if you are making economic profit, a regular person would think of economic profits as like super profits. If you're earning economic profits, it means you're making more money doing what you're doing right now than any other alternative that you have in front of you. And so you definitely want to keep doing that thing. Or if you're not already pursuing that opportunity and there are economic profits to be made, that means there's more money to be made doing that thing than whatever it is that you're doing now. And so you'd want to enter that market and compete. Okay, that's what positive economic profits mean. Zero economic profits mean you're probably still making accounting profits. I mean, you don't have to be making accounting profits, but probably you are. And you're making just as much in this opportunity as you would be in your next best opportunity. So there's no reason to change what you're doing. Okay, you should just be satisfied to stay where you are. And then finally, if you're earning negative economic profits, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're losing money on your business, right? You could have accounting profits of $1 million a year, but still have negative economic profits if doing something else would earn you $2 million a year, okay? So having negative economic profits means there's something else you could be doing that would make you more money, so you should stop doing what you're doing now and move on to doing that other thing, okay? Switch. So that's a kind of a subtle distinction, accounting versus economic profit, but it turns out to be a pretty important concept. And I want to talk about an example of that, of where it applies. Because one of the things about opportunity costs is they're not always obvious. Okay, you may not realize right off the bat what your opportunity costs are, and they can be difficult to find sometimes. It takes effort. Okay, because an accountant is never going to walk into your office and say, oh, our opportunity costs are through the roof. We're losing economic profit. We need to change our behavior. Your accountant is just going to be looking at assets versus liabilities. What's the bottom line at the bottom of your balance sheet? And if that number is positive, well, then you're not in terrible trouble. So you're doing okay. But even though your accountant is unlikely to tell you about your opportunity costs, you should still be on the lookout for them, because without knowing your opportunity costs, you cannot maximize your profit. You cannot maximize your well-being, okay? So let me take you through an example of that, where that would be the case. Let's talk about Southwest Airlines in the early 21st century. Year 2001, not a good one for airlines in the US. Two big reasons for that. The first one was, of course, the September 11th attacks in New York City and at the Pentagon in Virginia. And of course, so demand fell quite a bit for air travel late in 2001. At the same time, the early 2000s, that's when oil prices really started to take off. 1990s, oil was pretty cheap, but starting in the early 2000s, it became more and more expensive, and now that makes it more expensive to run an airline. It starts sort of putting a pinch on their profits. Okay, now, turned out that there was one firm, one airline, that had done a pretty good job of, what would you say, hedging against this risk. Namely, they had gone to fuel suppliers and they had locked in earlier prices. So in the late 1990s, they had gone to the oil suppliers and they'd said, look, we will pay you a bit of a premium over today's price of not oil, but of fuel, of jet fuel. We'll pay you a premium, a little bit more than what we have to pay on the spot market for this. In exchange for us accepting that higher price, you will agree to sell us fuel at this price for an extended period of time, 5 years into the future, 10 years into the future. So that was protection for them against rising fuel prices. And so as those fuel prices going up, Southwest Airlines was cushioned from those extra costs, or at least those extra accounting costs. And so what I have here is just a very simplified example of the profit that Southwest Airlines could earn just thinking about flying between two cities. Okay, maybe it's Los Angeles and Seattle. And what I have here is the price per ticket that they might be able to charge, and what I have here is the cost of fuel to the airline. So what you have is, and here I'm thinking about this in terms of per passenger, and I'm keeping this really simple and just assuming that the fuel cost is the only cost that they're facing. Obviously, that's not true. It's a simplification. But to illustrate the point, it's useful to pare things down to just the price you can charge and the cost of the fuel. So you've got Southwest Airlines. Let's say that they could charge every passenger $500 for that flight. And since they've locked in the early cheaper rates on fuel, it only costs them $400 per passenger to fly that flight. Well, that would give you a profit of $100. Okay. Now, this other down below, I've got pi with an O subscript, which would be the profit of any other airline flying between, let's say, Los Angeles and Seattle. Now, for those other airlines, they can sell at the same price that Southwest can, but let's assume that their fuel price is $600 per passenger. Well, that's greater than the price of the ticket that they can sell. So their profit on that trip would be minus $100, or they would take a $100 loss per passenger. And so you could ask the question, should Southwest Airlines fly this route? And also, should the other airlines fly this route? Well, for the other airlines, it looks pretty obvious, right? They're losing money on every flight. Every passenger is costing them $100. And so assuming that they expect this price to stay the same and this fuel cost to stay the same, for an extended period of time, no, the other airlines should not be flying between Los Angeles and Seattle. Okay, they should obviously shut down. Let's assume for the moment that that doesn't affect the price that Southwest Airlines can charge. What about Southwest Airlines? Should they fly the flight? Well, they've got this price of $500. They only have to pay $400 per passenger in fuel. They're earning a profit of $100. And so you could look at that and say, well, yeah, sure, they should keep on flying because they're earning a profit of $100 per passenger. Okay, it's still profitable. They should keep it open. But that ignores their opportunity cost. Okay, what would that opportunity cost be? Well, one thing, you can think about the different opportunities that Southwest Airlines has for what they could do with their fuel. One thing they can do with their fuel is they can take $400 worth of fuel, they can put it into their own airplanes, and they can turn it into $500 in ticket fares from a customer, right, which earns them a $100 profit. On the other hand, what else could they do? Well, they could take that $400 worth of fuel, and you can see what's everybody else paying for fuel. Well, everyone else is paying $600 for an equivalent amount. So they could take that $400 of fuel, sell it off to other people who did not lock in those earlier cheaper rates, and they're going to make $200 in profit. Okay, so instead of putting the fuel into their own airplane, they can put it into other people's airplanes. Now, obviously, they're not going to, the other airlines aren't going to buy that fuel to fly this particular route, but presumably there's other routes they could fly that would still be profitable. So the opportunity cost that Southwest Airlines would face is the profit that they could earn by selling their fuel elsewhere, okay, which is a $200 profit. So if you're just looking at these numbers here, which are the accounting profits, it looks like Southwest Airlines is earning a nice, healthy profit on each flight. But now, if you subtract out the opportunity cost of $200, you take those accounting profits, subtract out the opportunity cost, and what do you have? Now you have the economic profits. Those economic profits are equal to the $100 in accounting profits minus the $200 in opportunity costs. It's minus $100. Okay? So this analysis, the economist would tell you, look, don't fly that flight because you're losing $100 in economic profit every time you take off between Los Angeles and Seattle. Why are you losing those $100 in profit? Because you could be doing something more profitable with that same fuel. Okay? So in this case, that opportunity cost is not obvious, but it is important. It's something that Southwest Airlines should be taking account of. Okay? Now let's move on to the next types of cost. These are going to be a little bit more straightforward, what you've maybe heard of already, maybe even before you've taken an economics class. So first up, we have a firm's fixed costs, or FC. Fixed costs are expenses that do not change with output. In other words, it doesn't matter if you make 0 units or 1,000,000 units. Your fixed costs are what are not changing between those levels of output. Fixed costs could be a number of different things. For example, if you, let's say you took out a loan to fund your business, and you have to now be making principal and interest payments back to the bank every month, well, that's a fixed cost. Okay, the bank doesn't care how much you produce. They're not going to charge you more in interest if you make more units, but they're also not going to charge you less in interest if you make fewer units. That's a fixed cost. Another fixed cost might be something like rent. If you haven't purchased your buildings outright and you've signed maybe a long-term lease with a landlord, you've got to make those payments month to month. That's also going to be a fixed cost. Okay. Under certain circumstances, some of your labor costs might be fixed. If you're working with a labor union and you've signed a contract saying that you'll have a minimum number of people working a minimum number of hours no matter what happens economically, that's also going to be a fixed cost that doesn't change with the level of output. Second, you have variable costs. Variable costs are expenses that do change with output. And of course, we'll shorten variable cost on most of these pages to VC. Variable costs are going to be things like most of the wages that you pay to your workers. You hire more people, you got to pay more wages. You work your employees longer hours, you're going to have to generally pay them more money. Variable costs would also include any of your utility bills, keeping the lights on, running the water, as you bring more people into the offices. Variable costs would also include depreciation on any capital equipment that you're using. Whenever you run a machine, it kind of runs down in terms of its life cycle, and so you're going to have to put money aside to buy another machine, and so the depreciation on those assets is a variable cost. You run your equipment more, the lifetime of that equipment starts getting shorter, or you start getting closer to the end of the life cycle of that that machinery. Okay. And then also any raw materials that you're buying to go into your production, those would also be variable costs. Total costs are pretty straightforward. Total costs are just your fixed costs plus your variable costs, right? Add those up, that gives you the total. And then the last type of cost that we're interested in is marginal cost, which is it's just the flip side of marginal revenue. Marginal revenue is how much extra money will I earn by selling an additional unit. Marginal cost is how much extra is it going to cost me to produce that next unit. Okay, so it's the extra cost of producing an additional unit. We're going to finish up with a quick discussion of a table that's showing all of these. This again is coming from your textbook at around page 50. We've got fixed costs in this column. We've got variable costs in this column, total cost, marginal cost. So let's start with fixed. In this case, you can tell that the fixed costs are $30, and that does not change. Doesn't matter how many units you produce. If your quantity is 0 or 10, or if you kept going, fixed cost would be $30 total. Okay. Now, one thing, by the way, if you want to figure out a firm's fixed cost and you don't know, like in a problem, if you're not given the fixed costs exactly, you could come over here to the total cost column, because you know that when a firm is making nothing, when it's not producing anything, its variable costs are going to be nothing. Okay, because variable costs, they scale up and down as you change output. So when you're making nothing, your variable costs will be nothing. So your total costs at 0 units is always going to be exactly equal to your fixed costs. Okay. Now in this example, the variable cost, as you produce more units, it gets costlier and costlier to produce. So variable costs go from 0 to 4, then from 4 to 10 if you're producing 2 units, from 10 to 21 if you're producing 3 units, and so on. Those variable costs just keep getting bigger. They always get bigger as you produce more units. Okay. Total cost, you'll notice that the numbers in these columns are always just the sum of these two numbers. So 30 plus 0 is 30. 30 plus 4 is 34. 30 plus 10 is 40, and so on, all the way down to unit 10. And then take a look at marginal cost. Remember in the last video I told you, if I just gave you total revenue on up to 10 different units, you would be able to tell me what the marginal revenue is by just finding the difference between the revenues at 2 different levels of output. Well, you can do the same thing with marginal cost. So total cost goes from 30 to 34. Marginal cost is going to be those extra $4 that it costs you to produce that first unit. When you produce the second unit and your total cost goes from 34 to 40, your marginal cost is the difference between those two costs right there. It's $6. You go from 40 to 51 in your total cost, your marginal cost is going to be $11, the difference between those two costs. A couple other things to notice. First of all, just like marginal revenue is not really well defined at a quantity of 0, same thing for marginal cost, because you never go from unit -1 to unit 0. So at a quantity of 0, it's not well defined. Second thing to point out is you don't even have to have the total cost curve to find marginal cost. All you need is the variable cost curve, because the difference in total cost between 2 different levels of output is always the same as the difference in the variable cost, because fixed cost is never changing. So 0 to 4, $4 marginal cost. 4 to 10, difference there is $6 marginal cost. 10 to 21, difference is $11 marginal cost, and so on. Okay, so those are the categories of cost. And now that we have a firmer idea of cost and revenue, in the next video we can talk about maximizing profit, finding the level of output that earns you the most money. All right, so we're going to move on to that. Remember to be flexible, communicate, and stay awesome.